The unimaginable just became reality. A dictator known for his iron grip and merciless authority has been reduced to begging, crying, and pleading for survival. Not on the battlefield, but on the world stage, where humiliation cuts deeper than bullets. Vladimir Putin, the man who once styled himself as the savior of Russia, now finds himself trapped in the deadliest checkmate of his career. And the mastermind behind this collapse? None other than Jong-un, the very dictator Putin thought he had outmaneuvered. What you're about to uncover is the shocking truth of how a secret deal between Kim and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy turned the tide of the war, wiping out over 100,000 Russian troops in a matter of months. This isn't just a story of war. This is the most devastating betrayal in modern history. A psychological and military masterstroke that has left Putin shattered and the world stunned. August 2025. Images circulate globally of Putin appearing before Russian generals, his face pale, his voice cracking, his fists trembling as he tries to explain away the catastrophic losses his army has suffered. He is visibly shaken, caught between rage and despair, while his commanders avoid eye contact, ashamed to report the truth. The Russian military machine, once feared, has been gutted from within. Entire divisions annihilated, tank brigades reduced to ashes, and front lines that once seemed unbreakable now lying in ruins. The reason? A secret pipeline of intelligence and covert aid flowing from Pyongyang to Kyiv. Jong-un, the man who months earlier was mocked as Putin's expendable pawn, has flipped the board entirely. Let's rewind the clock to understand how this betrayal was engineered. Late 2024, Putin's forces are still locked in grinding battles across eastern Ukraine. His military is stretched thin, hemorrhaging soldiers and equipment at rates unseen since the Second World War. Desperate for reinforcements, Putin turns to his so-called allies. He leans on Iran for drones, on China for dual-use technologies, and most crucially, on North Korea for manpower and artillery shells. At first, Jong-un plays along, shipping millions of rounds of outdated ammunition, deploying elite troops, and posturing as Russia's loyal junior partner. But what Putin doesn't realize is that behind the curtain, a second track of diplomacy has already begun, one that will set the stage for Russia's most humiliating defeat. According to Western intelligence leaks, Kim's regime initiated quiet back-channel communications with Ukrainian operatives as early as October 2024. On the surface, North Korea was supplying Russia with weapons and soldiers. But in reality, Kim was siphoning battlefield data, frontline strategies, and Russian logistical weaknesses directly to Kyiv. Every shipment of artillery shells carried not just weapons, but critical information about Russian stockpiles and supply lines. Every deployment of North Korean soldiers doubled as reconnaissance for Ukraine's command structure. What Putin believed was blind loyalty was in fact a Trojan horse operation of historic proportions. And then came the masterstroke. Zelenskyy, ever the strategist, recognized the unique opportunity Kim presented. Ukraine began feeding false intelligence back through North Korean channels, knowing it would reach Moscow unquestioned. Whole Russian offensives were redirected into Ukrainian traps, ambushes, and kill zones. Russian tank battalions marched straight into mine-laced fields because Putin trusted maps drawn from North Korean scouts. Artillery brigades exhausted their shells, pounding decoy positions, while Ukraine preserved its strength for counteroffensives. By spring 2025, Russia had lost more than 60,000 troops in operations that analysts now believe were deliberately engineered failures, orchestrated by the Kim-Zelenskyy axis. And still Putin didn't see it. He mistook the mounting losses as bad luck, poor generalship, or Western interference. He blamed NATO, he purged his own officers, he screamed about sabotage, never realizing the betrayal was coming from the ally he trusted most. Meanwhile, Kim continued to play the loyal friend. All smiles and photo ops with Putin, all promises of solidarity, all empty gestures of support. Behind the scenes, he was the architect of Russia's unraveling. By summer 2025, the results were undeniable. Russia's death toll crossed 100,000. Divisions that took years to build were obliterated in weeks. Even elite paratrooper units, once considered untouchable, were caught in ambushes so precise they seemed impossible without insider knowledge. And that's because they were impossible unless Ukraine had help from the inside. Kim delivered Putin's army on a silver platter to Zelenskyy, and the results were catastrophic. But here's the most brutal part. Kim didn't just destroy Putin's military strength, he destroyed his psyche. The footage of Putin breaking down in front of his generals is more than just a political embarrassment. It's the moment a dictator realizes he's been played at his own game. Putin, the master manipulator, the man who turned allies into pawns, was turned into the ultimate pawn. Kim Jong-un, the supposed junior partner, had flipped the script, using Putin's arrogance and desperation against him. And the price was staggering. Russian families flooded the streets demanding answers for their dead sons. Widows of fallen soldiers began appearing on social media with devastating testimonies about government lies and broken promises. Morale inside the Russian military plummeted to levels unseen in decades, with desertion skyrocketing as soldiers realized their commanders were leading them into slaughter. For the first time, whispers of outright rebellion began circulating in Moscow elite circles. Internationally, Putin's image is never weaker. He is no longer feared, but pitied, mocked, and isolated. Leaders who once courted him now keep their distance, wary of being dragged down by his failures. NATO, emboldened by Russia's collapse, steps up its support for Ukraine. Even China begins to quietly reassess its ties, realizing Putin's power is a sinking ship. And all of it, every tear Putin sheds, every coffin draped in the Russian flag, every shattered division, traces back to Kim's secret deal with Zelenskyy. Think about the psychological brilliance of this maneuver. Kim, a man long seen as desperate for recognition, managed to turn his weakness into a weapon. By pretending to serve Putin, he gained his trust. By funneling soldiers and ammunition, he gained access. And by quietly flipping sides, he not only saved face internationally, but elevated himself into a position of unprecedented leverage. For the first time, Pyongyang wasn't just a pawn on the global chessboard, it was the kingmaker. And the symbolism couldn't be clearer. While Putin wept, Kim smiled. While Russian coffins piled up, Kim's prestige soared. While Russia bled itself dry, Kim positioned himself as the dictator who outsmarted the master of deception. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a psychological assassination of Vladimir Putin.
Putin's tears didn't come from the loss of land or the shifting tides of geopolitics. They came from the unbearable humiliation of being beaten at his own game. For 2 decades, he prided himself on being the master manipulator, the chess player who always saw 10 moves ahead. He undermined Western elections, destabilized regions, and broke alliances with a flick of his pen. Yet here he was, staring at casualty reports so devastating they could break empires, all because he underestimated a dictator he believed to be desperate, weak, and dependent. The man who thought he had North Korea in his pocket now realized he had been holding a viper, one that struck with surgical precision when the moment was right. By September 2025, the numbers were undeniable. Over 100,000 Russian troops confirmed dead or permanently incapacitated. Military hospitals in Moscow, Rostov, and St. Petersburg overflowed with amputees and shell-shocked veterans. Entire schools of young men in Russia's regions were half empty because their students had been sent to the front and never returned. Putin could no longer mask the disaster with propaganda. Too many families were demanding answers. Too many funerals were happening to hide. And in the cracks of Russia's once firm control, the whispers began. Putin has lost his edge. Putin has lost his war. Putin has lost Russia. Meanwhile, the world watched as Kim Jong-un emerged emboldened. For decades, he had been the pariah of Asia, sanctioned, mocked, dismissed as a sideshow dictator with more bluster than substance. But now, He had humiliated the Kremlin itself. Diplomats across Asia began quietly approaching Pyongyang, no longer treating Kim as a nuisance, but as a figure who had shifted the balance of power. He had proved that even the so-called master predator of Moscow could be played, manipulated, and gutted. For Kim, it was the recognition he had craved his entire life, earned not through loyalty, but by betrayal executed so perfectly that history will study it for generations. And Zelenskyy? He became the architect of the most stunning battlefield turnaround of the century. The Ukrainian president, once derided by Russia as a comedian turned politician, now commanded the stage as a strategist capable of dismantling one of the world's largest militaries. He had forged a covert alliance with the most unlikely of partners and weaponized betrayal itself into a tool of war. Ukrainian troops, once outnumbered and outgunned, now struck with pinpoint precision, thanks to intelligence funneled through Kim's operatives. They targeted supply lines, intercepted communications, and dismantled Russian offensives before they could even begin. Every Russian defeat became a Ukrainian victory, and every Ukrainian victory amplified Putin's shame. Russian generals began turning on each other. Accusations of sabotage, incompetence, and treason echoed through the Kremlin's walls. Senior officers who once swore loyalty to Putin were now whispering doubts in private chambers. Some openly questioned whether the president himself had lost his ability to lead. For the first time since the war began, cracks appeared not only in the Russian army, but in the foundation of Putin's rule itself. He was no longer the untouchable czar. He was a desperate old man begging for miracles. The psychological warfare was relentless. Ukrainian media leaked intercepted communications proving that Russian divisions were being misled by faulty intelligence supplied through trusted channels. Families of dead soldiers discovered their sons had marched into traps because Moscow had relied on maps secretly doctored in Pyongyang. Each revelation widened the wound. Each headline reminded Russians that their soldiers had died not just in war, but in betrayal. Putin wasn't just losing troops, he was losing faith, loyalty, and the myth of competence that kept him in power. In North Korea, state television quietly celebrated Kim's cunning without ever naming the betrayal outright. Footage of parades showed smiling soldiers, while commentary hinted that our supreme leader has humbled the mighty. Inside Pyongyang, Kim's inner circle toasted to the fact that for the first time, North Korea had shaped the course of a global conflict. Kim didn't need to announce his deal with Zelenskyy. The results spoke louder than words. Every coffin draped in the Russian flag was a silent victory march for Pyongyang. But what broke Putin the most wasn't just the military collapse. It was the isolation. China, long his reluctant partner, began pulling back economic support, wary of being associated with a sinking regime. India, once carefully balancing ties, grew cold and distant. Even his traditional allies in Central Asia started distancing themselves, calculating that the Kremlin's grip was loosening. Putin, who had styled himself as the leader of a global anti-Western bloc, now found himself alone, abandoned, humiliated, exposed. And then came the moment that shocked the world. Cameras caught Putin in a closed-door military council meeting, leaked by insiders who had grown weary of the charade. His voice cracked as he pleaded with his generals for solutions, his hands shaking, his face wet with tears. This wasn't the strong man of 2014, riding horses shirtless and projecting dominance. This was a broken man, begging his subordinates to find a way out of a war he could no longer control. The footage spread like wildfire, eroding what little fear he still commanded. For a dictator, tears are more dangerous than bullets, and Putin had shed them publicly. Yet here's the chilling part. A wounded predator is always the most dangerous. Analysts warned that Putin, humiliated and cornered, may lash out with unprecedented ferocity. Nuclear threats have already resurfaced in his rhetoric, each one more desperate than the last. His propaganda machine, once finely tuned, now spews contradictions. calling for peace one day, vowing total victory the next. The chaos at the top of the Russian state reflects the chaos on the battlefield, and that chaos was engineered by Kim's betrayal. Still, the damage is irreversible. Over 100,000 Russian soldiers gone, hundreds of tanks reduced to rubble, generals stripped of authority, either dismissed, imprisoned, or quietly eliminated. A nation's faith in its leader shattered beyond repair, and the world watching as the man who prided himself on strength now embodied weakness itself. Kim Jong-un's secret deal with Zelenskyy wasn't just an alliance, it was a weapon. A weapon more devastating than missiles, more destructive than artillery, more crushing than sanctions. It was the weapon of betrayal, wielded with such precision that it dismantled the Kremlin's power structure from within. Putin's tears are the proof. His cries for mercy are the echoes of a man who finally realized he was never in control. This is the brutal truth. Dictators fall not only from external enemies, but from the hands of those they believed were allies. And in this war, Kim Jong-un has taught the world that loyalty among tyrants is a myth. Every handshake hides a knife. Every alliance is temporary. Every partner is a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. And Putin? He has learned this lesson too late. His empire of lies, built on manipulation and fear, is crumbling. His soldiers lie in mass graves. His people whisper of betrayal. His allies melt away. And the world has seen him cry.